So in this section, we'll be talking about network security groups. Now, we already talked about the concept of virtual networks and how we create these networks. Inside of them are subnets, and running on subnets are devices such as virtual machines that have a network interface to get onto the subnet. So you've got virtual machine has a network interface. The network interface connects to the subnet, and the subnet is part of a overall virtual network. Now, these devices that are connected to a virtual network communicate with each other over these virtual network paths. The network security group allows us to specify which type of traffic is allowed and which type of traffic is blocked. It is basically an allow/deny metaphor for letting traffic pass over the network. Now, the network security group can either be attached to the subnet or it can be attached to the network interface. So if you think of this as being a tunnel, on one side is the virtual machine with a network interface. On the other side of the tunnel is the subnet as a whole. You can put your network security group on either side of the tunnel. It's still going to allow or block traffic traveling over that tunnel. So let's take a look at this in action. So we have a virtual machine connected to this default subnet. The subnet has this address range. Okay. Now, if we go into the virtual machine, we can see the network interface. The network interface actually tells us in this summary section that there is a network security group attached to the network interface. So this, in this instance, is attached to the network interface. And if we go back to the subnet, then we do not have any security group attached to the subnet. Okay, so in this instance, the security is on the virtual machine side. Let's go to the network security group. This was created when we created the virtual machine. So if we didn't specify it, it would create this new one for us. I'm going to go into it. Now, by default, the network security group has a number of rules. It splits the rules into inbound rules and outbound rules. So you can look at this as being traffic coming into the virtual machine over that virtual network interface card and traffic that's leaving the machine. Let's have a look. I'm going to go to the inbound security rules tab here, and we can look at them in a little closer detail. So this is the default configuration. I have not added any other rules into the inbound security of this virtual machine. So by default, it allows traffic to come from another machine running on the same virtual network. Okay, so any port, any protocol over this virtual network is allowed to come into the machine. So by default, two virtual machines running on the same virtual network are able to talk to each other. Okay, that makes sense. And also by default, if you have a load balancer running on this virtual network that is, sitting in front of a virtual machine, then that load balancer is allowed to talk to the virtual machine. So again, any port, any protocol, this is the load balancer situation. All other traffic attempting to get into the virtual machine is blocked. So this is the deny action. So other computers, the load balancer allowed, everything else blocked. What this means is if I was to attempt to RDP into this computer from my desktop here, then I should hit this rule saying deny all inbound because I do not have the RDP port open for inbound traffic. Why don't we go ahead and add the RDP port for inbound. So I say add, and what we want is the source is going to be any for now, but ideally we want a source to be our network or our computer specifically. So I could actually say I want only my computer. If I did, it got my IP address. So what is my IP address? I could limit the traffic that is coming inbound over this RDP port to my computer that is located at this address. If my ISP was to change the IP address of my computer, then this would stop working. I can also do this in a CIDR configuration, so I can say /24, and that will cover all IP addresses on this from 0 to 255 in this case. And what we want to is basically send traffic to any destination, so we don't have a specific computer in mind, although we could put the private IP address of or the public IP address of this computer, but we won't. And the question then becomes which port. Okay, so the port for RDP traffic is 3389. Okay, so that is the standard port for RDP traffic to go from over the network. RDP traffic is TCP. We might as well block off UDP traffic. And we want to allow RDP traffic. Now the priority works by the lowest number having the highest priority. So you'll see that the default rules are a very high number, 65,000 up to 65,500. And so we can set the priority. The default was 100. I'll set it to 1,000. And we're going to call this RDP traffic. And so if I was to add this rule, because we put a source IP address, only computers on my network will be allowed to RDP over port 3389 to any computer that is subject to this rule. And for now, this is again on the network interface card, so it's only that virtual machine that's affected. I can do the same thing for HTTP and HTTPS traffic. There's actually another way of adding this. This is set to the advanced by default. If I say a basic, then I can choose from a drop-down list for, let's say, HTTPS traffic, and you'll see that it fills the ports in automatically. And I can call this HTTPS traffic. We'll let that add. And similarly, we can do the same thing for HTTP traffic. Okay, so this is HTTP traffic. Now, if we were doing, this is for Windows, obviously, the RDP port. If we were doing Linux, we would have to add the SSH port, which I believe is 22, but don't quote me on that. So basically, now we've allowed 3 traffic sources. 2 of them are from any source IP address in the entire world, and 1 of them is just from the limited set of addresses on my ISP's network. Okay, so that's the inbound traffic rules. Let's switch over to the outbound. The outbound is basically wide open. Okay, so this rule is saying that from this computer, from this virtual machine, it is allowed to talk to any other virtual machine on the same virtual network, allowed, and it is also allowed to talk to the internet. So that is internet traffic. So basically any computer on this network and any computer on the entire internet. All other outbound traffic is denied. But what other outbound traffic would there be besides the internet and other machines on this virtual network? Okay. So maybe we would, if we would want to do VNet peering and have other computers on other virtual networks, but otherwise the outbound rules are pretty open. The inbound rules are pretty closed. Okay. So that's the basics of a network security group. We're going to look at assigning this network security group to other virtual machines and even to the subnet in the next video.